In 1933, Tallulah Bankhead left a New York hospital weighing 70 pounds. A 5-hour emergency operation had nearly killed her. The cause was gonorrhea, which she claimed she caught from either Gary Cooper or George Raft. As she walked out, she told her doctor a line people would repeat for the rest of her life. She said, "Don't think this has taught me a lesson." That was Tallulah Bankhead in a sentence. She refused to be corrected by anything, including her own body. Her story runs from an Alabama political dynasty to the stages of London in a lifeboat directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Along the way, she became one of the most quoted women in America. She was born on January 31st, 1902 in Huntsville, Alabama, into Southern political royalty. Her grandfather, John Hollis Bankhead, was a United States Senator. Her father, William Bankhead, would rise to Speaker of the House of Representatives. Her uncle sat in the Senate as well. The power did not spare her an early wound. Her mother, Adelaide, died of blood poisoning about 3 weeks after giving birth to her. The baby was named for her grandmother, Tallulah Brockman. Her father sank into grief and drink and pulled away from his daughters. So Tallulah and her older sister Eugenia were raised by relatives. They lived mostly with their grandparents in Jasper, Alabama. They also spent long stretches with an aunt in Montgomery and later in Washington. The girls moved between households and schools for their whole childhood. She was a difficult and theatrical child. The family sent her to convent schools hoping to calm her, and it did not work. As a small girl, she once performed at a party attended by Orville and Wilbur Wright. She won them over with an impression of her kindergarten teacher. Her way out arrived when she was 15. She entered a photo contest run by the movie magazine Picture Play, and she won. The prize was a trip to New York and a chance at the screen. Chaperoned by an aunt, she went and never really came home. New York gave her scraps at first. She made her Broadway debut in 1918 in a play called The Squab Farm. It sank without a trace, and so did most of the roles that followed. She picked up small parts in silent films to pay her way. Her real education happened at the Algonquin Hotel. There she drifted into the orbit of the Round Table, the circle of Dorothy Parker and Robert Benchley. She built a name as a sharp-tongued girl about town well before she built one as an actress. For 4 years, the acting itself went nowhere. Frustrated, she gambled everything on London. She sailed in January 1923, encouraged by the producer Charles Cochran, who promised to help with her expenses. Within weeks, she landed a role in a melodrama called The Dancers, staged under the actor-manager Gerald du Maurier. She played a saloon dancer draped in feathers and pearls. The play was no critical triumph, but she was a sensation. One critic wrote that sex oozed from her eyes. Young women lined up at the stage door after every performance. They copied her clothes and her hair and chanted her name from the gallery. Her fame grew so large that her name became a verb. To Tallulah, meant to bring that reckless glamour into a room. She stayed in England for 8 years and appeared in around 24 plays. She acted in Noel Coward's Fallen Angels and Michael Arlen's The Green Hat. One episode from those years shows how she worked. She had wanted the lead in a play called Rain and lost it. Coward offered her Fallen Angels instead, with the show due to open in 4 days. She learned the lead almost overnight and made a hit of it. Off the stage, she lived without breaks. She smoked more than 100 cigarettes a day. She drank gin and bourbon like water and kept a case of pills to sleep or to stay awake. She became a regular at Kate Merrick's Club 43, a notorious hub of London's drug scene. By 1931, Hollywood came calling and she went home to America. Paramount signed her wanting a new Garbo or Dietrich and shaped her films to that mold. Her debut was Tarnished Lady, directed by a young George Cukor. She followed it with My Sin, The Cheat, and Thunder Below, and none of them landed. Making those pictures pulled her into the nightclubs of Harlem. She started going regularly to buy cocaine and hear jazz. There she grew close to the torch singer Libby Holman and to Billie Holiday. Audiences who loved her on stage could not feel her heat through a camera. Her best remembered Hollywood film was Devil in the Deep in 1932. She played the wife of a mad submarine commander with Gary Cooper and Cary Grant as her love interests. Charles Laughton stole the picture as a jealous husband. Paramount then loaned her to MGM for Faithless, her last movie of that era. She also had a gift for scandal at the worst moment. In 1932, she told Motion Picture Magazine that she had gone too long without a lover. The industry was fighting its reputation for loose morals, and the piece, remembered as the "I Want a Man" story, embarrassed everyone. She was already fed up with the scripts, and Hollywood was fed up with her. MGM did offer her one more chance, a lead in Red Dust replacing Jean Harlow. Harlow's husband had just died by suicide, and the studio feared bad press. Bankhead was disgusted and refused. She later wrote that damning Harlow for another woman's misfortune would be one of the shabbiest acts imaginable. Her contract lapsed, and she returned to New York and the stage. Then came the 1933 collapse that opened this story. The emergency surgery ended any chance of children, and she was 31. She had already had 4 abortions. The comeback years that followed were rough. She financed her own Broadway production of Forsaking All Others, and it flopped. A revival of Rain fared no better, and critics kept calling her miscast. The good parts stayed out of reach for the rest of the decade. Then, in 1939, her greatest role finally arrived. Lillian Hellman cast her as Regina Giddens in The Little Foxes. Regina is a cold, grasping Southern woman who lets her husband die on the stairs rather than fetch his medicine. The part fit Bankhead like a glove. She was ferocious in it, and the critics agreed. She won the New York Drama Critics Award, and Life magazine put her on its cover. The show ran for more than 400 performances on Broadway, then toured the country. It was the triumph she had chased for 20 years. During that tour, she lost her father. William Bankhead died in September 1940, still Speaker of the House. She had adored him despite his early distance, and the loss cut deep. She kept performing through her grief. Hollywood, meanwhile, kept handing her stage triumphs to other women. Bette Davis played Regina in the 1941 film of The Little Foxes. Davis had already taken the screen version of Dark Victory, another role Bankhead first played on Broadway. Watching her parts go to a movie star stung her for years. Her next peak came in 1942 with The Skin of Our Teeth. She originated the role of Sabina in Thornton Wilder's strange, ambitious play, which won the Pulitzer Prize. She took a second Drama Critics Award and a Variety Award for the year. She toured that show too. The production also produced a lasting grudge because the director was a young Elia Kazan. The two feuded through the run and for years afterward. She was never easy to direct, and she knew it. She once said that if a play was going badly, she would rather set fire to it than fix it quietly. Her finest screen performance came in 1944. Alfred Hitchcock cast her as a cynical journalist, Constance Porter, in Lifeboat. The whole film takes place in one boat after a torpedo attack, and she anchored it, glamorous and brittle among the survivors. She won the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Actress. She got no Oscar nomination, and the reason was contractual. She was not signed to a major studio, so no studio machine pushed her name. The film earned other nominations, including one for Hitchcock. It remains the performance that keeps her on screen for later audiences. Her private life kept pace with her work, loud and public. In 1937, she married the actor John Emery at her father's home in Jasper, Alabama. They tried to build an acting partnership, and their first project was Antony and Cleopatra. It was a disaster. The critic John Mason Brown wrote one of the most famous pans in theater history. He said Tallulah Bankhead barged down the Nile as Cleopatra and sank. The marriage ended in divorce in 1941. When it was final, she told a reporter there would be no remarriage, and she never wed again. She was open about her sexuality in a way that startled her era. She called herself ambisextrous. She was linked with men and women and spoke freely about her affairs with reported partners including Billie Holiday and the actress Patsy Kelly. She treated her own scandals as material rather than secrets. Her voice was the other half of the legend. It was deep and cracked and unmistakable, the work of all those cigarettes. She called nearly everyone darling, partly from warmth and partly because she could never remember names. Impressionists spent decades trying to copy that growl. At home, she surrounded herself with what she called her caddies. These were young men, often gay, who kept her company and looked after her. She was famous for greeting guests in the nude and throwing parties that ran for days. She once said, "Say anything about me, darling, as long as it isn't boring." Underneath the chaos, her generosity was real. She spent money helping foster children and helping families flee the Spanish Civil War and the rise of fascism. She was an outspoken supporter of civil rights when that was a dangerous stance for a white Southern star. Her politics stayed liberal and loud her whole life. She had one more big stage hit left in her. In 1948, she revived Noel Coward's Private Lives and toured it before bringing it to Broadway. Audiences packed the house, and the run was long and profitable. Time put her on its cover that November. By the early 1950s, though, the lifestyle was collecting its debt. The drinking and the barbiturates and the cocaine were wearing her down. Good stage roles for a woman her age were getting scarce. She needed to reinvent herself again. She found it on the radio. In 1950, she became host of a lavish NBC variety program called The Big Show. She played mistress of ceremonies over a parade of stars like Ethel Merman and Frank Sinatra. Her husky voice and fast tongue were made for the microphone, and the show won real acclaim. In 1952, she published her autobiography titled simply Tallulah. It was frank and funny, and it became a bestseller. She was selling a legend now as much as the acting. The public loved the character she had made of herself. The stage work grew thinner and rougher. In 1956, she played Blanche Dubois in a revival of Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire. Williams was a close friend who adored her, but the reviews for that Blanche were harsh. She got one last real prize with a 1961 play called Midgie Purvis, which earned her a Tony nomination. Her final years leaned on her fame as a personality. Her last Broadway appearance came in 1964 in Williams's The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. In 1965, she made her final film, a British horror picture called Die, Die, My Darling, playing a murderous widow. In 1967, she guest starred on the Batman series as a villain called The Black Widow. That Can't Be Turned was her last performance of any kind. The woman who had conquered the London stage ended on a superhero show, and she seemed to find it funny. Years of smoking had left her with emphysema. In December 1968, she caught influenza that turned into double pneumonia. She died at St. Luke's Hospital in New York on December 12, 1968, at 66. Accounts of her last words vary and should be taken with caution. The most repeated version has her asking for two things as she faded: codeine and bourbon. It is unverified, but it is the ending people wanted for her. She left behind nearly 300 roles across stage, film, radio, and television. She was inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame in 1972, 4 years after her death. Alabama placed her in its Women's Hall of Fame in 1981. What kept her interesting was the gap between the wit and the wreckage. She could learn a lead in 4 days and outshine the best critics in 2 cities. She could also drink herself unconscious in front of her own guests. She once said that if she had to live her life over, she would make the same mistakes, only sooner, and you believe she meant it.